I actually did some research into why we like pumpkin spice so much, and the answer is actually pretty scientific, and it's threefold. Number one, nostalgia. The smell is so unique and so recognizable, and smell is so closely linked to memory that one whiff and we're immediately transported to, I don't know, our grandmother's kitchen or wherever we most enjoyed homemade baked goods. Number two, pumpkin spice is usually accompanied by copious amounts of sugar and fat, which are literally addictive. Number three, and this one's pretty obvious, it's marketing. When a brand releases a pumpkin spice anything, they're always releasing it for a limited time, so naturally we're gonna go out and get as much of it as we can while we still can. The ironic thing about that is that pumpkin spice consists of cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger, and clove, which you can really have any time. What you can't have any time is an actual pumpkin. I can feel myself sort of tapping into that nostalgia of pumpkin. Because whether it's consciously or not, I'm about to make for you 3 of the most traditional recipes I have ever made on this show. But I hope there's something uniquely Wingredients about all of them. And if you're new here, that means they're achievable, there's something about them that's creative or unexpected, and most importantly, they celebrate the pumpkin for what it is, and all of its winter squash magic. There is a traditional Afghan pumpkin dish called kadoo barani, which I used to order at an Afghan restaurant on St. Mark's Place called Khyber Pass, which sadly no longer exists, but I spent many a happy hour there when I was in my early 20s. This is one of those recipes that varies from family to family. Sometimes the pumpkin is baked, sometimes it's braised, but it always simmers in a tomato sauce, usually with beef, and it's always finished with yogurt and mint. And in my version, I'm replacing the beef with lentils because A, I wanted it to be a well-balanced vegetarian entree, and B, I think lentils go really well with all the spices in here. I think better than beef does. I halved this pumpkin so I could scoop out all the pulp and the seeds, and I'm just using a good old-fashioned ice cream scoop for this. If you have to scrape off a layer of flesh to get all those stringy guts off, that's okay. And I'm doing this into a bowl instead of the trash because I'm gonna fish out those seeds and roast them. And if you wanna know how I do that, keep an eye on my Instagram this month. Now I'm going to use a Y peeler, or whatever vegetable peeler you've got, to remove the skin. Most of this you can do with your pumpkin cut side down on your cutting board, nice flat surface. But for the edges and the stem, you are going to have to move it around. Then I'm going to cut it into large chunks. I like to cut the pumpkin in quarters and then split the quarters into thirds so they look almost like melon slices. Your Y peeler is also good for getting some of those rogue stringy bits off your pumpkin pieces. Now I've got a tablespoon of oil in my pan over medium-high heat, and I'm going to let it get really hot before I add the pumpkin. I'm going to lay the pumpkin pieces with a flat side down, because the first step to braising is browning, and I want to get as much surface area directly on the pan as I can. I guess it probably couldn't hurt to season these a little. Once all the pieces are nicely browned on at least 2 sides, maybe 4 to 5 minutes per side, I'm going to remove them and set them aside. Then I'll lower the heat to medium, add some more oil if I need to, and add my aromatics. I've got some onion and garlic and a teaspoon each of turmeric and coriander. I'll just toss that around to coat the onion and saute that until the onion is tender and the garlic is fragrant. A couple minutes. Now I'll add a can of diced tomatoes, a tablespoon of brown sugar, a cup of vegetable stock, 2 cups of water, 2 cinnamon sticks, and a generous pinch of salt, and that's my braising liquid. I'm also going to add my lentils at this point and let those cook for about 10 minutes. Ooh, I'm starting to smell all those wonderful spices now. At this point, I'm gonna taste my lentils for seasoning, but not for doneness. They're still gonna be pretty crunchy at this point. Yeah, I do want some more salt in there. Then I'm gonna nestle in my pumpkin pieces until they are mostly submerged in the liquid. And I'm gonna cook for another 10 minutes until both the pumpkin and the lentils are tender. As you're cooking this, if you start to notice it get too dry, feel free to add more liquid. Just continue to taste for salt. And while that's cooking, I'll mix up my yogurt sauce, which is about a cup of plain yogurt, a clove of garlic, squeeze of lemon, and about a tablespoon or so of fresh mint. You know I don't usually like to use colored plates, but for this dish I'm making an exception because I think it looks really nice if you put a little layer of yogurt on the plate first and top it with your pumpkin and lentils. Oh, it smells so good. Then you could put more yogurt on top to your taste. And finish it with some more mint. Hello, beautiful. Yum. Oh, there is so much I love about this dish. I mean, the flavor, number one, but number two, it's a weeknight win, 1-pot dinner, pantry friendly. I mean, what's in here? Some dried lentils, a can of tomatoes, and standard spice cabinet spices. And that yogurt is a perfect, fresh contrast. And you can make this a meal by serving it with rice or warm flatbread. But just by itself, I mean, I'll eat this out of the pot. All right, so we've had our weeknight win 1-pot dinner, and now we're gonna do the complete opposite of that, and we're going to make gnocchi from scratch. Now, you guys know that I would not suggest you take on a cooking project this involved, nor would I publish a recipe for it unless I knew that the end result was going to be good, and it will be. You can trust me. Also, if you're going to make pasta at home, gnocchi is a really good place to start because you don't need any special equipment and it doesn't have to be shaped perfectly, uniformly. Also, I've got a couple of gnocchi hacks up my sleeve that are going to streamline this process as much as possible. So the first thing I'm going to do is cook my pumpkin and potato. I've got half a pumpkin here that I've already cleaned, and I'm just going to brush it with a little bit of oil and season it with a little bit of salt. The potato I don't have to do anything to. I'm just going to throw it on the pan, throw it in the oven. I know this looks like an odd assortment of things to go on a sheet pan, but for this recipe you want 2 parts pumpkin and 1 part potato, and half a small pumpkin and 1 medium small russet potato should yield about 1.5 cups and a cup respectively. and I'm gonna bake them at 400 degrees for about 40 minutes until they're both soft throughout. And while that's in the oven, we've got lots of stuff to prep for our homemade pesto. I told you this was gonna be involved, but it's gonna be worth it. We gotta toast some walnuts. I already chopped these, threw them in a little pan over a medium flame. It only takes a couple minutes for them to get brown and start to smell toasty. We're gonna grate a whole lot of Parmesan cheese. Now to my food processor, I'm going to add half a cup of fresh sage leaves, a fourth of a cup freshly grated Parmesan, a third of a cup toasted walnuts, a clove of garlic, and some salt and pepper. Then I'll process that while I gradually drizzle in a quarter cup of olive oil, just until a smooth paste forms. Now I'll transfer that to a bowl and save it for later. I've taken my potato and pumpkin out of the oven, and as soon as they're cool enough to handle, I'm right back to the food processor. I'm gonna remove the skins. They're gonna come off real easy. And break the pieces off and stick them in there. And I wanna make sure I'm looking at a 2-to-1 ratio of pumpkin to potato. So I think I will discard some of this potato. I'm not gonna use the whole thing. And I'm gonna let my food processor do all the work. I'm gonna mash these and combine them at the same time. That's gnocchi hack number 1. So here's my next gnocchi hack. I'm gonna mix my dough on my sheet pan. And the reason I'm doing it this way is because you don't want to overmix gnocchi, but you want the flour to be really well incorporated into the dough. So if I spread it out in a thin layer, I've got more wet surface area to dry. First I'm going to add an egg, which I've already beaten, and then I'll drizzle that around evenly. Then I'll add my seasonings. I got a teaspoon of salt and half a teaspoon each of cinnamon and sugar. I know that's super basic of me, but it just makes it taste more like pumpkin. Like, if I'm not the target sucker for the pumpkin spice marketing campaign, I don't know who is. Now, I'm gonna start out with about 3/4 of a cup of flour. And I'll take my potato masher and work the dry ingredients into the wet. On one of my tests of this recipe, I was so preoccupied with getting process shots of incorporating the flour that I totally forgot to add the seasonings. But you know what I did? I just added a pinch of cinnamon and sugar to the butter sauce that I served it in, and it was delicious. So that's a lesson for you. Kitchen mistakes are rarely unsalvageable. So now I'll keep adding my flour a little bit at a time. And eventually I'm gonna start going with my hands. And my goal is to be able to shape this dough into a log that's more smooth than sticky. So I need just enough flour to get to that point. The recipe calls for up to 2 cups. It really depends on the moisture content of your potato and pumpkin. And how about this no mess sheet pan hack, huh? Don't get too excited though, because I'm about to transfer this to the counter. Keep your sheet pan handy though, because you're going to use that to store the finished gnocchi. You can give it a quick clean just with your fingers. You use the leftover dough to scoop up the leftover flour. Easy as that. Okay, now I'm finally ready to shape these gnocchi. I'm going to cut this log into 4 or 5 pieces. And then I'm going to take one piece at a time and roll it out into a snake. Make sure your surface is really well floured. When the diameter of your snake is about 1 inch thick, I'm going to slice it into inch-sized pieces. Now some people like to discard the ends because they're not the right shape, and I find that very discriminatory. Cook them, they're just as good. And some people like to roll each one over the prongs of a fork to create ridges. And that's not something that I'm interested in spending time doing. And I don't think it makes that big of a difference. Transfer your finished gnocchi to your sheet pan. And start in the next section. I've started a pot of water boiling for the gnocchi, and I'm going to salt it generously. I'm also going to brown some butter in this skillet. As the butter starts to melt, I'll whisk it consistently. And it's going to foam up a little bit as I whisk. And eventually the color is going to darken and it's going to start to smell nutty and delicious. I'm just now starting to get the nutty smell. And I'm going to watch for the brown bits to form at the bottom of the pan. Here they come. It is hard to see in a dark colored pan. I should probably invest in a lighter pan so I can do brown butter tutorials, but there it is. Then I'm going to turn the heat off. And this is a little trick that a chef taught me. I'm going to give it a squeeze of lemon juice. And supposedly that stops the browning process, so it doesn't burn. When my water's boiling, I'll drop my gnocchi in one at a time. They are quite delicate, so you don't want them to clump together. And when they're done, they're going to float to the top. It only takes a couple of minutes. And I'll let them float for 30 seconds or so just to make sure they're all fully cooked. Then using a slotted spoon, I'm going to transfer them directly to the pan with the butter. Now some of the pasta water is going to get in there, and that's a good thing. It actually is going to give a nice structure to that butter sauce. You might even want to add a little extra. I'm gonna. And I'm also going to use the pasta water to smooth out our pesto. So I've spooned out a tablespoon or so of pesto into this bowl. And to that, I'm going to drizzle in a little bit of pasta water, just a spoonful. This is not an exact measurement. You just want it to be thin enough that you can drizzle it over your gnocchi. This pesto is really meant to be more of a garnish. The sage has a pretty strong flavor, so you could add as much or as little as you like. Let's give it a try. Oh, all that work. This better be worth it, Sarah. Yep, it's worth it. Oh, these are so good. You might think they're less fluffy than traditional gnocchi. They've got sort of more of an al dente bite to them, which I'm not mad about. And, you know, we've been talking about tradition all day, but sage and pumpkin is such an iconic pairing. It's like tomato and basil. You can't really improve on it. My friends, I am going to bake a pumpkin pie for you. I know, could I get any more cliche and traditional? I'm embarrassed for myself. But my pumpkin pie recipe is really, really special to me. I make it for my family every Thanksgiving. And in case you haven't guessed by now, Pumpkin pie is my favorite dessert. And I don't use the word favorite lightly, as you may know. So if pumpkin pie is on the menu, I'm gonna order it. I've had a lot of pumpkin pie in my life, and mine is my favorite. So now that I've thoroughly oversold it, let's get started. Once again, I've halved and scooped out my pumpkin. I'm gonna rub each half over with neutral oil, but I'm not gonna worry about seasoning it at this stage. And just like we did for the gnocchi, I'm gonna put them in the oven at 400 degrees for about 40 minutes until they're soft. So while that's roasting, I'm gonna get started on my crust. Now I do pumpkin pie in a graham cracker crust because I really like the complementary flavor and the contrasting texture. Bonus is that I don't have to roll out any dough, and I've definitely had enough of that for today. So I'm gonna crush a package of graham crackers into my food processor. That's 9 or 10 full sheets. And if you have to do it in batches because you only have a baby food processor, so be it. Then I'll combine them with 5 tablespoons of salted butter, melted, and 1/4 cup of brown sugar. It's really fun to mix this with your hands. It feels kind of like wet sand. Very therapeutic. I'm gonna reserve 1/4 to 1/2 cup or so because I'm gonna use that as a topping. The rest of it I'll pack into my 9-inch pie plate. And you should have just enough left to cover the bottom and the sides with a 1/4 inch thick crust. Find something round and flat to help you pack it in. I've got this flat-bottomed old-fashioned glass, which works great. When the pumpkin's roasted, I'll lower the oven temp to 350. The pumpkin comes out, and the pie crust goes in. And I'll pre-bake that for 10 minutes. And when my pumpkin's cool enough to handle, I'll remove the skins and transfer the flesh to the blender, to which I'll add a cup of almond milk and blend until smooth. Now most pumpkin pie recipes call for heavy cream or evaporated milk or even sweetened condensed milk, and the truth is you could use any of those. I think the almond milk gives it a little nutty flavor, obviously, but also a lighter kind of delicate texture, and I think it emphasizes the pumpkin a little bit better. More pumpkin, less custard. Then I'll transfer that to a bowl, add in 2 eggs, a cup of sugar, 2 teaspoons of cinnamon, and 1/2 teaspoon each of ground ginger, ground cloves, and salt. And I'll whisk to combine. That gets poured into my pre-baked crust, and it goes back in the oven for 40 to 50 minutes until a knife inserted into the center comes out clean. But there's one more step. Halfway through the cooking time, maybe 20 minutes or so, I'm gonna take it out of the oven and add my graham cracker crumb topping. I like to put it just around the perimeter to give the illusion of a thicker crust. But you could also get creative. You could use a stencil or a cookie cutter and make a cool design. Here she is. There's always so much pressure slicing the first slice on camera. Maybe one day I'll learn how to be a real cooking show host and have, 3 backup pies so I could do multiple takes. Feels good though. It's a pretty skimpy slice. Should have gone for a bigger one. Oh, I lost a little bit of crust. Oh well. I'll eat it out of the pan with a fork later. Oh, happy Thanksgiving to me. Like I said, that filling is a lot more pumpkin than custard, and that's the way I like it. And that crust, crunchy, spicy, sweet, the perfect foil for it. I'm so glad I have this whole pie to eat now. And that's it, folks. 3 ways to win with pumpkin. Happy pumpkin spice season to all. If you like what you see, subscribe. You can find all these recipes and more on wingredients.com, and follow me on social media at Wingredients. I'll see you next time.